They are so delicate, drawled Lord Varix of the Shattered Dominion, his scaled hands flexing in mock cradling as laughter rippled through the chamber. 1 year old, all three identical. Do you know they cried the entire journey? My aide said the sound was like being stabbed with needles. Such pathetic creatures. And these are what humans breed to protect. Fragile things, fit only for leverage. Another counselor, a bulbous creature whose voice gurgled like water through pipes, chimed in. I hear they require constant feeding, warmth, affection. A most inefficient design. Leave them in the wild, and they expire. Surely no species that produces such weaklings could rise to challenge the Empire. The laughter grew louder, an orchestra of clicks, howls, and metallic echoes. They spoke as though humanity itself had been dissected on the table, a curiosity of flesh and instinct. But the mirth faltered when the chamber doors opened, and a single human entered. General Alexandra Hale did not look extraordinary, not in the way alien eyes measured greatness. She was tall by human standards, but unremarkable among the giants and serpentine figures who filled the seats. She wore no resplendent uniform, only a tailored suit of midnight fabric, her hair tied neatly at the back of her head, her boots polished but practical. What unsettled the chamber was not her appearance, but the calmness that followed her like a shadow. The guards at the door stiffened, as though she had walked through them rather than passed. Her eyes, a steady gray, scanned the chamber with the warmth of a polite hostess greeting dinner guests. And then, to the astonishment of all, she placed a small tray upon the central podium. I brought tea, she said, her voice quiet but clear. And biscuits. Humans think better when their hands have something to do. A silence fell, sharp and bewildered. The delegates turned to each other, mandibles clacking, tendrils twitching. Lord Varix's tongue flicked against his teeth in distaste. This is a council chamber, not a market square, human. You presume. I presume nothing, Alexandra interrupted softly, pouring steaming amber liquid into delicate cups she had somehow smuggled past security. But it seemed rude to arrive without hospitality. Where I come from, we don't start conversations on an empty stomach. She smiled, and something in that smile unsettled them more than her defiance. It was gentle, almost grandmotherly, yet her eyes did not match it. They were sharp, calculating, alive with a predator's patience. A smaller delegate, one of the feathered Kithari, leaned forward. Are you aware, he asked with a nervous trill, that the Empire has seized your offspring? 3 of them, triplets, rare even among humans. They are currently under examination. Surely you understand the position you are in. Oh, I understand perfectly, Alexandra replied, stirring sugar into her tea. She tasted it, then nodded as though pleased with the flavor. You believe that by taking my sons, you hold humanity's leash. You think their cries weaken me, that their fragility makes me fragile. It's a common mistake, really. The delegates murmured, confused by her composure. Many had expected weeping, begging, perhaps even threats. Instead, she sat with crossed legs and calm posture, sipping tea as though she had come for a social call. Lord Varix sneered. You mistake your place, human. You stand before the greatest empire this galaxy has ever known. We crushed the Ethels in 2 generations, erased the Votari fleets from the stars, and bent thousands of worlds to our will. What is Earth but a stone adrift in the void? What are you but one woman clinging to her spawn? Alexandra tilted her head, as though considering a child's tantrum. That's quite the resume, she said mildly. But forgive me, I can't help noticing that all those species you just mentioned aren't here anymore. Wiped out, enslaved, forgotten. And still, for all your power, you felt the need to steal 3 crying infants from their beds in the dead of night. That doesn't speak of strength. That speaks of fear. Her words landed like stones dropped into still water. Ripples of unease spread across the chamber. The gurgling delegate shifted in his tank, bubbles escaping nervously. The feathered Kithari ruffled his wings, unable to meet her gaze. Varix's scales flushed a darker hue, his claws flexing. You will return them, Alexandra said, her tone as polite as ever. You will place them in my arms unharmed, and you will apologize for your lapse in judgment. Then, perhaps, we can avoid what comes next." The laughter returned, forced this time, brittle around the edges. A delegate from the insectoid Krell clicked its mandibles in derision. Empty threats from a species barely clawing its way into faster-than-light travel. "You bring tea to a war council, human. Do you think civility will save you?" Alexandra's smile widened, though her eyes remained cool. "Civility? No. Civility is what you mistake for weakness. It's what makes you laugh at us while we listen, while we watch, while we wait. But let me tell you a secret." She set down her cup, the faint clink echoing far louder than it should have. "Humans don't laugh because things are funny. We laugh because we already know how the story ends." The chamber quieted, as though the comet itself were listening. For the first time, the delegates studied her not as an amusing anomaly, but as something else entirely. There was no trembling in her hands, no quiver in her voice. She spoke as though she were not outnumbered, not standing alone before powers that spanned galaxies. She spoke as though she were inevitable. The feathered Kithari leaned toward his neighbor, whispering, "Why does she not demand their return? Why does she not weep?" His feathers trembled. "It is wrong. It is unnatural." Alexandra glanced at him, and though her smile did not falter, the Kithari shrank back as if struck. She rose slowly, her movements measured, every step deliberate as she approached the center of the chamber. The guards tensed, but none moved. She did not need weapons. Her presence was a blade in itself. "You wanted leverage," she said softly. "You wanted to prove humanity is fragile. And perhaps we are, by your standards. Our bones break, our skin tears, our children cry when they are hungry. But fragility is not weakness. Fragility is pressure. And pressure," she paused, her eyes sweeping the room, "makes us sharper." The silence was absolute. The delegates could hear the faint hiss of the comet's atmosphere vents, the creak of their own limbs, the thunder of their own hearts. In that stillness, Alexandra's voice cut like a wire drawn taut. "I will give you one chance," she said. "Return my sons. Place them before me, breathing and whole. Do this, and perhaps I'll forget the insult. Fail," she inhaled, steady and unhurried, as though savoring the taste of inevitability, "and I will end your empire." Her words hung in the crystalline air, fragile and yet unbreakable. The laughter was gone. The amusement was gone. In its place was something the Galactic Council had not felt in centuries. The faint, chilling awareness that they might have awoken a predator they did not understand. And then Alexandra smiled once more, gentle as before, her hands folding neatly in front of her. "Shall we continue the conversation?" The council chamber did not breathe, but the silence carried the weight of breath held too long. Across the crystalline tiers, alien faces betrayed a spectrum of discomfort. Scales rippling, feathers trembling, tendrils coiling tight. No one spoke at first. They had laughed at her, dismissed her as a quaint curiosity, but something in her voice had cracked the illusion of superiority. They waited now, not for her answer, but for her next move, as though prey uncertain whether the shadow belonged to a passing cloud or a circling predator. Lord Varix finally broke the stillness, though his voice carried more strain than he intended. "The Empire has endured for millennia, human. We have ruled with precision, with order, with ruthlessness. You cannot imagine the scale of our fleets, the depth of our dominion. Do not confuse personal attachment for strength." Alexandra's lips curved again, but it was not warmth that flickered there. It was a sharpened edge hidden beneath velvet. "Personal attachment," she echoed softly, as though tasting the words. "I call it clarity. You take my sons, and suddenly the world snaps into focus. Every strategy, every calculation, every ounce of patience collapses into a single truth. There is nothing I won't sacrifice to get them back. Nothing I won't burn to ash." She lifted her teacup again, her hand steady. "You might call that weakness. Where I come from, we call it motherhood." The council rustled uneasily. The Krell delegate, his mandibles rasping in agitation, leaned forward. "Empty words. You are one soldier, one species. Do you expect us to tremble because a human woman snarls like a beast? Alexandra placed the cup down with exaggerated gentleness, the porcelain chime ringing through the chamber like a warning bell. Beast, she said quietly. If I were a beast, you'd have heard the bones snapping already. I am something far worse. I am polite. I am patient. I am civilized. And that means I'll watch you long enough to know exactly where to cut when the time comes. The feathered Kithari shifted again, feathers puffing out in a nervous display. His neighbor hissed a laugh, mocking the exchange. Humans are primitive. Their threats are like their games, loud, colorful, and meaningless. This, polite patience, it is theater. They lack the discipline to follow through. Games, Alexandra repeated, raising a brow. You're right about one thing. We do love our games. Poker, chess, football. The kind of games that last hours, days, even entire seasons. We sit, we study, we bait. And then, when the moment comes, we strike in one move that makes every waiting hour worth it. She leaned forward, her voice dropping into a softness that somehow carried to every corner of the hall. This council thinks it understands patience. But you've never met a parent at 3 a.m. pacing the floor with 3 screaming infants, praying for silence and survival. You want to test endurance? Humanity has been training for it since we crawled out of caves. The gurgling delegate tried to chuckle, but it came out watery, strained. You speak in riddles and sentiment. We deal in logistics, in fleets, in armies that blot out suns. Alexandra smiled, that warm, disarming smile that made the unease deepen. And we deal in people. Billions of stubborn, quarrelsome, impossible to unite people. Until someone takes what's ours. Then suddenly, all the bickering stops. You think you've taken 3 children. What you've actually taken is the one thing that unifies humanity faster than any banner, any anthem, any flag. The cry of a child in danger. A wave of murmurs surged through the chamber, more anxious than before. She had shifted the ground beneath their feet, turned the narrative from weakness into something unervingly resilient. Still, Varix clung to arrogance, his pride too swollen to yield. So what will you do? He demanded, claws tapping against the dais. March your infant civilization against us? Send your, what do you call them, navies of rusting metal hulls? You would be crushed before you ever reached our borders. Alexandra's eyes locked onto his, and for the first time, the mask of cordiality cracked, not into rage, but into a glint of something colder. Her gaze was not human anymore, not to them. It was the gaze of a predator who had stopped pretending to be harmless. Funny you should mention borders, she said. Do you know how humans see them? Not as walls, not as cages, as lines to be tested. We crossed oceans in wooden coffins, scaled mountains that killed half of us, stared into the void of space with tin cans and duct tape. And every time someone told us no, we asked ourselves how fast we could turn it into yes. Her voice lowered. Borders aren't barriers to us. They're invitations. The insectoid delegate froze mid-gesture, a shiver racing through his carapace. Somewhere in the upper tiers, a scholar of the long-lived Cyril race whispered to his companion, "This one, she is not here to bargain." Alexandra inclined her head politely, as if granting him credit for his observation. "Exactly," she said. "I'm not here to beg or barter or whimper. I'm here to give you a choice. Admit your mistake and return my children. Or test how long your empire survives after you've shown me its beating heart." For a heartbeat, the chamber swayed between fear and defiance. Then an alien guard, a hulking brute of chitin and sinew, clicked his mandibles and snarled. "Enough. She is one mother. She is nothing. I would crush her skull myself and end this farce." The words barely left his mouth before Alexandra turned her head toward him, slow and precise. She did not rise. She did not shout. She simply spoke, her tone conversational, almost curious. "Your species feeds on the larvae of the cheenworm, doesn't it? The ones that burrow in the methane swamps on your homeworld." The guard stiffened, his mandibles pausing mid-click. "They only thrive within a narrow band of temperature. Remove the clouds that hold the heat in, and the swamps freeze. Your larvae die. And when your larvae die, her smile was soft, merciless. So does your species. The guard took a half-step back, mandibles trembling. The chamber stilled in horror. She had spoken the anatomy of annihilation, as if reciting a recipe. No dramatics, no raised voice, just the precision of a surgeon describing an incision. That, she said gently, turning back to her tea, was the polite version. The council erupted into murmurs, the unease cresting into something closer to fear. Delegates argued in hisses and growls, their confidence crumbling. The feathered Kithari whispered, "She knows too much. How does she know these things?" Another answered, perhaps they study us." Quietly, for longer than we thought, Varix slammed a claw against the stone. "Lies. She seeks to frighten us with half-truths and stolen whispers. Humanity cannot know the inner workings of so many species. We keep our secrets buried." Alexandra's gaze swept across the chamber, calm and knowing. "Secrets," she murmured. "You think we don't understand secrets? Humanity was born keeping secrets from itself. From the neighbor across the street, from the rival tribe over the hill, from the governments who thought they could keep us obedient. Every species hides. The difference is, we make it an art. You hide your weaknesses. We catalog them." The counselors stiffened, their unease deepening into realization. This was not posturing. She had already mapped them, dissected them, filed them neatly into her arsenal. They were not hearing threats. They were hearing inventory. For a long moment, the chamber was quiet except for the slow hum of the comet's life support. Then, from the back tiers, an elderly Cyril delegate spoke, her voice dry with age and fear. "She does not bluff. She waits. She watches. And then she strikes." Alexandra inclined her head as though complimented. "Wise words. Perhaps you should remind your colleagues what happens when they mistake humanity's silence for submission." Her words settled like ash over the chamber. Every flicker of bravado dimmed. The delegates, once eager to mock, now found themselves studying her hands, her eyes, the way she measured every breath. She was no longer the quaint visitor offering tea. She was something older, deeper, forged from fire and fragility alike. At last, one of the counselors whispered what the others had begun to suspect. "They wanted this," he said, voice trembling. "They wanted us to take the children. It was never desperation. It was bait." The chamber froze, every gaze snapping back to Alexandra. She lifted her teacup once more, the steam curling like smoke from a battlefield. Her smile was soft, almost tender, but her eyes gleamed with iron. "Now you're beginning to understand." The chamber no longer felt like the center of an empire. It felt like a cage, and every delegate within it began to wonder who had locked the door. The murmur that followed Alexandra Hale's last word swelled and cracked into full debate, voices colliding in terror and disbelief. They accused one another of weakness, of cowardice, of listening too long to the humans' riddles. But the unease was spreading, undeniable, like cracks in ice beneath their feet. Alexandra waited. She didn't pace. She didn't raise her voice. She let the storm of their panic whirl around her as though it were nothing more than a breeze. She adjusted her cuffs. She poured herself more tea. She sat with patience so unnatural to them that it unsettled them more than any outburst could have. Every second of silence she allowed them to fill was another second they revealed themselves to her. At last, Lord Varix thundered above the noise, his voice scraping through the chamber like steel dragged across stone. "This is theater. Do not let her poison you with insinuations. Humanity has no such foresight. They are too young, too fractured. Their species has barely begun to crawl among the stars." Alexandra swirled her cup, watching the amber liquid catch the refracted starlight. "You're right," she said softly. "We are young, but that's what makes us dangerous. The old are predictable. The old have patterns. You've been repeating the same plays for thousands of years. Honor, intimidation, conquest. Humans don't play by old rules. We invent new ones when the old ones bore us." She raised her eyes, her gaze steady, merciless. And you played right into our newest one. The words slithered into the chamber, and unease turned into dread. The Krell delegate hissed. What game? Alexandra set her cup down and folded her hands. You thought you were clever when you took my sons. You thought you had found humanity's weak point. But weakness, she said, her tone as sharp as broken glass, can be turned into bait. The Cyril elders' feathers trembled. No. Yes, Alexandra answered simply. The triplets were never unguarded. We placed them where you could reach them. We let your spies hear whispers, see windows of opportunity. You thought you had discovered a vulnerability. What you found was a hook. She leaned back slightly, her posture deceptively casual. Each child you so proudly paraded into your custody carried more than their mother's blood. They carried eyes. They carried ears. They carried trackers smaller than a mote of dust. Right now, every breath you take, every word you whisper, every ship you've positioned to watch Earth, all of it streams back to us. The silence that followed was so profound it seemed to press on their skulls. Delegates glanced at each other in horror. Some reached instinctively for comlinks, only to find static in their channels. The realization hit like a tidal wave. Their secure lines, their fleets, their hidden strongholds, all compromised by the very infants they mocked as fragile. Alexandra's smile was gone now. What replaced it was worse. Stillness. As if she no longer needed the mask of civility. Her eyes were winter steel, her voice the calm of a surgeon about to cut. You didn't take my sons. My sons took you. The insectoid guard she had shamed earlier let out a hiss, mandibles clicking in panic. It is impossible. We scanned them, nothing, no weapons, no devices. Because you were looking for weapons shaped like yours, Alexandra said. Bulky. Obvious. You searched for bombs and blades, not for code written on strands of DNA. You scanned their bodies and overlooked the lullabies we wove into their cells. The gurgling delegate's fluid shifted violently in his tank. Biological encryption? That is forbidden. By you, Alexandra interrupted. Not by us. The chamber boiled into chaos. Some shouted denials. Others demanded immediate termination of the children. But a few, the wisest, or perhaps simply the most terrified, remained silent, their gazes fixed on Alexandra as though waiting for the knife to fall. They understood. The game was already lost. Lord Varix roared over the noise. Even if this is true, it changes nothing. Our fleets number in the millions. Our firepower can incinerate entire worlds. You are one woman, one species. And you, Alexandra cut in, her voice slicing through his bluster, are an empire built on routine, on the assumption that tomorrow will look like yesterday, that your systems will always run, your slaves will always obey, your enemies will always crumble. But your fleets, your weapons, your routines, they're predictable. We know the routes of your supply chains. We know the fail-safes on your dreadnoughts. We know which of your governors hoard more than their share, and which of your admirals would sell their fleet for a taste of power. Her voice dropped into something quieter, heavier. Do you want to know how we know? Because you told us. Not with words, with patterns, with arrogance, with the certainty that no one was watching while you laughed at us. The counselors sat frozen, their bodies trembling, their colors shifting in unease. The mighty chamber of empire had become an interrogation room, and the woman they had sought to humiliate now stood as their judge. Alexandra did not shout, did not gloat. She simply let them drown in the truth. The Cyril elder whispered again, almost reverently, "This is the moment. They have unmasked themselves." Alexandra finally stood, and though she made no threatening motion, every guard in the room flinched. "You wanted to see humanity's weakness," she said. "Here it is. We love too deeply. We guard too fiercely. We laugh too easily. But here's what you never understood. Love makes us relentless. Guarding makes us cunning. And laughter? Laughter is the sound of predators who already know where to bite." Her words were punctuated by a low tremor that shook the comet's crystalline walls. At first, the delegates thought it was a quake. Then they realized the truth. Something massive had entered orbit. The starlight refracting through the chamber fractured into streaks of shadow as vessels eclipsed the comet. Not one, not dozens, hundreds. Alien voices broke into cries. Some tried to call for their fleets, only to find their channels jammed. Others scrambled for evacuation routes, but the doors were sealed. The comet trembled again, this time from the deliberate thrum of engines settling into blockade formation. Alexandra's voice remained calm, almost bored. We don't need millions of ships. We need enough. Enough to choke every exit, to sever every artery of your empire, to make you bleed out while the galaxy watches. We don't fight the way you do, wasting armies on glory. We fight like surgeons. We cut and cut until there's nothing left that can heal. Lord Varix rose to his full towering height, scales flaring in defiance. You dare blockade the Empire? You will be crushed. Alexandra looked up at him, and for the first time, her smile returned, but it was stripped of all warmth. You've already been crushed. You just haven't realized it yet. The gurgling delegate thrashed in his tank, panic overtaking him. What do you want from us? Name your price. Alexandra's eyes softened for a fleeting moment, and the human beneath the general revealed herself. I want my sons, breathing, whole, laughing again in my arms. Her voice hardened once more. And then I want your empire to remember this day for as long as it exists, if it exists at all. The delegates fell into terrified silence. For a long, heavy moment, the only sound was the hum of the human blockade above them, the faint hiss of comlinks choked into static. The chamber of dominion had become a tomb waiting for its inscription. Finally, Alexandra walked back to the center podium. She picked up the teapot, now half empty, and refilled her cup with practiced ease. Her calmness was the most terrifying thing in the room. She sipped, then set it down again. We've unmasked ourselves, she said quietly. You wanted to see what humanity truly is. Now you know. We are the patient silence. We are the polite smile. We are the laugh that unsettles before the strike. And once we've decided you've crossed the line, we don't stop. She looked around the chamber, her gaze sweeping over the terrified assembly like a blade searching for its next cut. Then her eyes lingered on the Cyril elder, the only one who had not tried to deny, who had not tried to flee. For a moment, something like respect flickered there. The elder bowed her head in bitter acknowledgement. It is too late then. The trap is already closed. Alexandra lifted her cup in a gesture that was half toast, half condemnation. Exactly. The comet trembled once more, but this time it was no engine, no quake. It was the sound of weapons locking, fleets positioning, predators readying to pounce. And Alexandra's voice, calm and final, sealed the moment. Now, she whispered, her gray eyes gleaming like cold fire. Shall we begin the extinction protocols? The silence inside the comet's council chamber had grown so absolute that even the steady pulse of the life support vents seemed deafening. Alien eyes darted toward the crystalline walls, where fractured light now shivered with the shadows of blockade ships. Fear, once a whisper, was now a suffocating fog. Delegates who had ruled galaxies found themselves reduced to trembling silhouettes, waiting for the verdict of a single human mother. Alexandra Hale did not move for a long moment. She stood at the podium, fingers resting lightly on the porcelain cup as though it anchored her to something gentler, something more human than the storm raging just beyond the comet's shell. Her voice, when it came, carried not rage but cold finality. You wanted to measure us. You laughed at our fragility, mocked our children. And now you have discovered what fragility truly means. Fragility is not weakness. Fragility is pressure. And pressure makes diamonds, or it makes something sharp enough to cut you apart. The Cyril elder lowered her head, as though accepting a truth long denied. The Krell delegate fumbled at his comms, desperate to summon fleets that no longer answered. Varix, towering and furious, clawed at the dais, sparks scattering as his scales struck crystal. You cannot do this, he thundered. The Empire will not bow to one woman. Alexandra's gaze lifted to him, unflinching. You're right, she said. You won't bow to me. You'll bow to the silence of your fleets, to the crumbling of your supply lines, to the screams of your vassals as they realize they're freer without you. You'll bow to inevitability. Her voice softened, though the steel beneath it remained unbreakable. And you'll bow when I take back what you tried to steal. With that, she raised one hand, not as command but as signal. The comet shook, vibrations rumbling through its bones. A shimmer filled the chamber as holograms sprang to life above their heads. They were not warships, not yet. They were images of their own systems, supply hubs, garrisons, fleets at anchor. Each hologram pulsed with red markers, spreading like drops of blood across a map. And with each pulse, another system fell silent. This is not invasion, Alexandra said. This is extraction. Every move we've made was prepared the moment you touched my children. Every worm in your code, every virus seeded into your logistics, every whisper placed in the ears of those you oppressed, it has all unraveled at once. Her gaze swept the chamber. You thought humanity feared war. The truth? We train for it in every breath we take. The gurgling delegate's tank sloshed as he thrashed. But how? We monitored your species. We saw your wars, petty, divided, destructive. You killed yourselves more than your enemies. You were chaos, not strategy. Alexandra's lips curved faintly, but her eyes did not warm. You mistook rehearsal for failure. Every war we fought was practice. Every scar we carved into ourselves was refinement. We've bled ourselves for centuries, so that when the day came to face something greater, we'd be ready. We've never stopped sharpening the blade. The holograms flickered again, this time showing living broadcasts. Alien admirals staring in disbelief as their ships refused to fire. Governors overwhelmed by riots. Entire sectors collapsing under the weight of revolt. Humanity's fleets were few, but they did not need to conquer. They only needed to pull the strings they had already knotted. The Kithari delegate, feathers splayed in terror, whispered, You are dismantling us without firing a single shot." Alexandra raised her tea once more, the gesture unbearably calm against the images of chaos. "We prefer efficiency. Bullets are loud. Silence lasts longer." But the silence broke when Varix roared, his pride refusing to wither. "You think this will end us? No trap, no scheme, no blockade can smother an empire that has ruled for 3,000 years. You are one woman with a personal vendetta, not a force of history." The general set her cup down and stepped away from the podium, her boots echoing with sharp finality against the crystalline floor. She looked up at him, her voice quiet. "You still don't understand. This isn't about history. This is about family. You touched my children. That means there will be no negotiations, no peace, no compromise. I don't need to erase your empire for the galaxy's sake. I'll erase it because you made me a mother at war." Her hand dropped to her side, curling into a fist. "And that is something the universe will never survive." The words detonated in the chamber. For the first time in centuries, the alien delegates saw their empire not as an eternal pillar, but as a fragile edifice already tipping. The realization came not from the holograms, not from the silence of their fleets, but from the unshakable certainty in her voice. Humanity was not asking permission to rise. Humanity had already risen. Then the chamber doors hissed open, and the air itself seemed to collapse inward as guards dragged in 3 small figures swaddled in containment cloth. Gasps cut through the silence. The triplets, small, identical, their cries muffled by alien restraints, were placed at the chamber's edge. Every delegate turned toward Alexandra, waiting for her reaction, for her restraint to finally crack. Instead, she walked slowly forward, her posture a paradox of serenity and fury. Her hands trembled only once as she reached down, lifting the nearest child into her arms. The boy's cry softened instantly, his small hands clutching at her collar. She gathered the other 2 close, one against each hip, her body wrapping around them like fortress walls. For the first time, her mask of cold civility melted, and the chamber saw her face illuminated not by menace, but by love so fierce it terrified them more than any weapon. "You thought they made me weak," she whispered. You never understood. They make me unstoppable." The chamber quivered under the weight of that truth. For the delegates, the scene was unthinkable. An empire shaking not before fleets, but before the unbreakable tether between a mother and her children. Some lowered their eyes, shame finally eclipsing arrogance. Others simply stared, their minds unable to reconcile the fragility of the infants with the inevitability of a storm closing around them. Alexandra turned back to the council, her son safe in her arms, her voice steady as steel. "I should kill you all where you stand. I should burn your empire until nothing remains but ash in the void. And perhaps I still will. But I want you to live long enough to understand why. Not because we are stronger, not because we are older, but because we are human, and you made the mistake of reminding us what we are capable of when someone tries to break us." The Cyril elder rose shakily, her voice trembling. "You will make the galaxy a graveyard." "No," Alexandra said, her gray eyes glinting. "I'll make it honest." Above the comet, the blockade shifted. Weapons powered, their hum vibrating down into the chamber. The delegates collapsed into pleas, into bargains, into cries of mercy. But Alexandra only rocked her sons gently, her expression unreadable. Her whisper was not for the council, but for the children pressed against her. "It's all right. Mama's here. Mama's got you." Her voice lingered in the chamber like smoke, and the aliens understood with dawning horror that the lullaby was not for comfort. It was a battle hymn wrapped in tenderness. Humanity did not separate love from war. It had fused them into something invincible. The Krell delegate shrieked, his mandibles flaring. "This is madness. If you destroy us, the galaxy will collapse into chaos." Alexandra met his gaze with a softness more chilling than fury. "Then let it collapse. Chaos is where humans thrive. Out of chaos we build. Out of ruins we rise. And when the galaxy remembers your empire, it will be as a warning whispered to children. Never steal from the species that laughs at its own funeral." The holograms above shifted once more, this time displaying a single word across every conquered system, every hijacked channel, every silenced fleet. Humanity. Not Earth. Not United Nations. Humanity. A single identity sharpened into a blade. Varric snarled, desperate to claw back control. "You will drown in your own arrogance." Alexandra adjusted the child on her hip, her gaze steady. "Arrogance is believing you could touch my children and survive it." The comet trembled again, weapons primed, silence pressing like the weight of deep water. Delegates cowered, waiting for annihilation. But Alexandra did not give the order. Not yet. She wanted the silence to suffocate them, to carve into their memory that humanity did not strike from rage, but from inevitability. She let them feel the slow terror of waiting for the axe. Then, at last, she turned back toward the podium, her children clinging to her, their cries now softened into hiccup breaths. She raised her voice, carrying it through the chamber with finality. "You thought the story ended with me weeping at your mercy. The story ends with you realizing there is no mercy, only consequence." She let the words sink, every delegate forced to breathe them like poison. And then, with one final glance at the chamber filled with trembling rulers, she whispered the words that sealed the fate of an empire. "Begin the protocols." The comet shook violently, lights flaring crimson as the blockade unleashed its first strike. The crystalline walls fractured with the sound of thunder, and the delegates screamed as the chamber itself began to collapse. Alexandra did not flinch. She gathered her sons close, her expression unyielding. In her eyes burned the terrible serenity of someone who had already accepted the cost. Humanity had unmasked itself, and there was no going back. And as the comet cracked and the empire screamed, Alexandra whispered one last lullaby to her children, her voice steady against the roar of destruction. "Sleep, my loves. Mama will watch the stars fall for you." The chamber collapsed into chaos, but her voice carried through the void, a final truth etched into the memory of every trembling survivor. The galaxy had laughed at humanity once. It would never laugh again.